Hi, my name's Claire, and for 20 years I paid every bill my sister couldn't. I bought her kids clothes, covered their insurance, paid their mortgage twice. So when I got sick, I thought I'd earned their care, but instead, I overheard them planning to get rid of me. Not in a hospital, not in a home. In their words, a human landfill. They wanted my house, my silence, my name erased. I was never supposed to hear it, but I did. And what I did next wasn't revenge. It was survival. Before we begin, what time are you listening? Where are you right now? Tell me in the comments, because I'm about to tell you how family almost buried me alive. I wake up before the house does. That's always been my habit. The kettle clicks off by itself, while the sky outside the kitchen window is still pale and undecided. I pour the water slowly, careful not to make noise, even though I'm the one who pays the mortgage here. The mug is chipped on one side. I keep meaning to replace it, but it still holds heat, and that has always been enough for me. The house feels full in a way it didn't used to. Shoes by the door that aren't mine. A jacket draped over the chair. Someone else's phone charging on the counter. I move around them without thinking, like I've practiced this choreography for years. I wipe down the counter, check the calendar on the fridge, and make a mental note to call the plumber again. The upstairs bathroom still runs longer than it should. Another thing waiting on me. This house is mine, on paper at least. For a long time, being the one who handled things felt natural. I was good at it. I paid tuition when my sister's oldest started college. I covered emergency repairs when their furnace gave out one winter. I wired money without being asked when someone got sick, or a car refused to start, or a bill landed at the wrong time. I never kept receipts, but I did keep a small ledger in the drawer by the phone, not to count favors, just to remember where the money went. It made me feel organized, responsible, like I was doing something solid with my life. No one ever called me generous. They didn't have to. I was reliable, and that seemed to matter more. By mid-morning, the house is louder. Cabinets open. Footsteps cross the hallway. Someone turns on the television without asking. My sister talks on the phone in the living room, her voice low and fast, the way it gets when she's solving a problem that isn't really hers. When I walk in, the conversation pauses. Not abruptly, just enough to notice. She smiles at me and says, "We're just figuring out logistics," as if that explains everything. I nod. It's easier than asking what logistics mean this time. They function well together, my sister and her family. They have plans, routines, inside jokes. I'm part of the picture, but never quite in the center. Decisions get made quickly. Then I'm informed, usually with a light tone, like they're doing me a favor by looping me in at all. I tell myself this is normal. Families evolve, roles shift. I don't need to be consulted about everything. Late in the afternoon, I'm passing through the dining room when I hear laughter. It's casual, comfortable. Someone says, "Well, she'll handle it. She always does." There's another laugh, softer this time. No one looks at me, no one says my name. I feel the comment land somewhere between my ribs, not sharp enough to hurt, just heavy enough to stay. I set the mail down more carefully than I need to. I don't say anything. I never do in moments like this. Silence has always been my way of keeping the peace. By evening, my energy dips in a way it didn't years ago. I notice it now, the stiffness in my joints, the way I sit down more often than I used to. I tell myself it's just age. Everyone slows down eventually. After dinner, I rinse dishes while someone else scrolls on their phone nearby. A bill sits on the counter, already opened, already assumed. I pick it up, glance at the total, and place it back without comment. Being needed has its own kind of comfort. I've told myself that for a long time. It's better than being alone, better than being irrelevant. Still, when the house finally quiets down, and I turn off the lights one by one, something feels off. The rooms don't settle the way they used to. The walls seem less familiar, less mine. I stand for a moment in the hallway, listening to other people breathe in the rooms I pay for, and I wonder when exactly things shifted. I didn't know it yet, but somewhere along the way, helping had stopped being a choice. The next evening, I was setting the table when I heard the hum of the television drift in from the living room. Some comedy rerun was playing, laugh track too loud, jokes too flat. My sister's voice floated over it, chatting with her husband, something about groceries, something about soccer practice. It was all so normal, it could have been a commercial for suburban life. I adjusted the napkins out of habit, folded corners, evenly spaced. Nothing fancy, just the kind of neatness that says someone still notices the small things. Dinner was roast chicken, green beans, and a salad I didn't want, but made anyway. I'd baked a pie that afternoon because I knew the kids liked something sweet. Their footsteps thundered down the stairs right on cue when I called out, "Food's ready." We sat in the dining room, the same one I used to eat in alone. Conversation bounced from topic to topic: a friend's wedding, a neighbor's new car, someone at work getting laid off. Nothing weighty, just sound. Then it happened. Ben, my sister's husband, was pouring himself another glass of tea when he chuckled and said, "Man, if we ever hit hard times, at least we've got our own in-house lender." I looked up from my plate. Kelsey, their oldest, grinned. "You mean Aunt Donna's Bank of Unlimited Funds?" Laughter followed. Not loud, but enough. It spilled into the space like wine knocked over on a white rug. Then I heard it. "She's basically a human ATM," Kelsey added, barely missing a beat. That one landed. Even the TV seemed to go quieter. My fork paused mid-air, a bite of chicken waiting. No one looked at me, not directly. My sister gave a polite laugh. Too quick, too rehearsed. Ben smiled into his tea like he hadn't heard anything out of the ordinary. I didn't say a word. The room buzzed back into its rhythm like nothing had happened. Someone passed the bread. Someone else asked if we were out of ranch dressing. I could feel the blood behind my ears. Not hot, just aware. The kind of awareness that makes you feel like a piece of furniture. Something useful, but not seen. Later, when the plates were being cleared, Kelsey reached over the table, grabbed the checkbook I always kept near the counter, and waved it toward her mom with a laugh. "Should we just leave this out? Save her the trouble?" That time, my name wasn't even part of the joke. Still, I didn't speak. I told myself it wasn't worth the awkwardness, that they didn't mean anything cruel, that people say things offhand, careless, thoughtless, all the time. But that moment split something, quietly. After the dishes were done, I stepped away, told them I needed a few minutes. No one questioned it. I walked into the kitchen, flipped on the small lamp by the sink, and stood there. My hands touched the edge of the counter, steadying more than supporting. My breathing felt shallower than usual, not panic, just smaller, like I was shrinking in my own house. I didn't cry. I've always been good at not crying. Instead, I stood there and tried to remember when helping became so tied to being a joke. I tried to count how many times I'd written a check without being asked, how many emergencies I'd covered before anyone said the word emergency, how many thank yous had started to sound more like habits than real words. And then I thought about that phrase, human ATM. 3 words tossed out like confetti. Meant to be funny, I suppose, but jokes don't stick unless there's a little truth in them, at least to the one saying it. I turned off the light, walked upstairs, and changed into my nightgown. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, wondering when I stopped being their aunt or their sister, and became something closer to a convenience. I didn't feel angry, not yet, but I did feel something shift. Not dramatic, not explosive, just a small, quiet tug in my chest, like a thread being pulled loose from something I hadn't realized was unraveling. And I knew it wouldn't stop with one joke. I told myself it was just a joke, but jokes don't stick unless they're already true to someone. That phrase didn't leave me. It clung like the faint scent of burnt toast, not enough to make a scene over, but it lingered in everything. A few days passed, then a week. Life moved on like it always does. Same routines, same rhythms. But something had shifted, not out loud, not in the open, just beneath the surface, where it counts. I started noticing things, small things, but they added up. Kelsey moved the antique lamp from the entryway into her bedroom. Said it matched her new curtains. No one asked me. Then the hall closet was cleared out, half the shelves now packed with boxes labeled seasonal decor, none of which were mine. I came downstairs one morning and saw a new welcome mat at the front door. It said, "The Sanders family." That's their last name, not mine. I stood there, barefoot, holding my cup of coffee, staring down at it. Not angry, just stunned, like I'd tripped over something invisible. I didn't say anything. They must have ordered it online, maybe even thought it was a nice gesture. But I noticed no one said a word about it, like they already assumed it belonged. The next weekend, I overheard my sister talking to someone on the phone. I was folding laundry in the next room. She was laughing, telling some story, and then she said, "Yeah, when we redo the kitchen, I want one of those big farmhouse sinks. Maybe knock down the wall to open it up." The kitchen. My kitchen. The one I spent 2 years saving to remodel. The one I picked tile samples for in the middle of the night when I couldn't sleep. When, not if, when. Later that day, Ben was scrolling through listings for new living room sets on his tablet, flipping it toward my sister now and then to ask what color scheme she liked. If we paint the walls, we should go with something light, cream or maybe that dove gray. No one said your house anymore. It was always the living room, the guest bathroom, the garage. At first, I thought maybe I was being sensitive, too caught up in semantics. But that night, I heard Kelsey on a video call with a friend. She was sitting at the kitchen table, feet up, sipping a soda she didn't buy. "Oh yeah," she said, laughing. "When I move back after college, I'll just take the upstairs room. It's already kind of mine." Kind of hers. I closed the door quietly behind me and went upstairs, sat on the edge of my bed, just breathing, just thinking. How did we get here? When they first moved in, it was temporary. My sister had lost her job. Ben's hours had been cut. I told them they could stay, a couple months, tops, until they got back on their feet. That was nearly 2 years ago. I didn't set an end date, didn't want to sound unkind. Back then, I thought I was helping, being useful, being family. Now I was starting to feel like a guest in my own home, one whose invitation had expired. And just as the unease started to settle in, something else showed up. I'd been feeling off for a few days, tired in a way that didn't go away with sleep, lightheaded now and then, a little shaky getting out of bed in the morning. Nothing urgent, just wrong. One afternoon, I was bringing in groceries from the car. The sun was out, but I felt chilled. I took a step onto the porch and had to grab the railing, just for a second, to steady myself. I told myself it was dehydration. Maybe I skipped lunch, maybe I needed more iron. But it stuck with me, that slight unsteadiness. The way my knees didn't feel quite trustworthy. I didn't tell anyone, not yet. I wasn't ready to hand over more control. A few days later, at dinner, someone, I can't even remember who, was talking about getting a new furnace. Ben said, "Well, once we replace the one in our place, we won't have to worry next winter." Our place. No one corrected him. I looked around the table. They were laughing, passing salad, talking about TV shows. Like it was theirs already. And maybe, to them, It was. That night, after the dishes were done and everyone had disappeared into their rooms, I walked through the house. Quiet steps on creaking floors. My house, or what used to be. I touched the edge of the fireplace mantel, the dent from when I dropped a picture frame during the remodel, the corner of the dining room table I'd sanded myself, the small scratch on the wall where I'd moved a bookcase years ago. I stood in the hallway and listened. The hum of other people's music behind closed doors, the sound of a washing machine running with clothes that weren't mine, voices on speakerphone, jokes I wasn't included in. The walls were still standing, but the story they were telling didn't include me anymore. They weren't waiting for me to leave. They were planning as if I already had. I didn't sleep well that night, or the one after. My mind kept circling the same thought. They weren't waiting for me to leave. They were building a life that didn't include me. The next morning, I found my sister in the kitchen, already dressed, already pouring vitamins into a little weekly pill organizer like the ones we used to buy for Mom. "I read these are good for heart health," she said, sliding the organizer across the table toward me. "Just take them with breakfast." I looked at the small compartments. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Everything sorted for me. All I could do was nod, though I hadn't asked for them. Later that afternoon, Ben peeked into my room without knocking. "You've been sitting too long. You should lie down for a bit," he said, like it was a suggestion. But he hovered in the doorway, waiting, as if I needed permission to ignore it. It started like that. Soft gestures, thoughtful at first. But soon I couldn't move through my own home without someone gently redirecting me. "You shouldn't be lifting that," Kelsey warned when I bent to pick up the laundry basket. "I'll call the doctor to follow up," my sister said, without asking if I wanted her to. One evening, while I was fixing myself a sandwich, she took the bread from my hands. "Too much sodium," she said, setting it aside and replacing it with a bland wrap I didn't recognize. "The doctor mentioned you should cut back." I hadn't heard the doctor say that. In fact, I hadn't been to an appointment in over a month. But when I asked about it, she replied quickly, "Well, I spoke to them. They said you probably should come in again. Don't worry, I scheduled it already. We'll go next week." There was no room left for no. It all sounded like help, looked like concern, but somewhere in the folds of it was a tightening grip. I started to feel less like a person and more like a project. By midweek, a sticky note appeared on the fridge. "Don't forget, Friday 10 a.m., Dr. Santos." My handwriting wasn't on it. That Friday, I sat in the waiting room, flipping through an outdated magazine, while my sister chatted with the nurse like she was the patient. "She's been a bit foggy lately," I overheard her say. "Not dangerous or anything, just not herself." I didn't remember saying that. Back home, I asked for details. My sister's voice got tight. "They said you're probably just tired. Nothing major, but let's not ignore it, okay?" It didn't sound like what a doctor would say. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being managed, like a business asset quietly under review. I stayed up late that night, rereading old notes in my calendar. I used to mark down every oil change, every dental cleaning, every check I wrote for their kids' summer camps. I'd been sharp once, careful. Now they talked about me like I was unraveling. A few nights later, I passed by the den on my way to bed. The door wasn't fully closed, and I heard voices. My sister, Ben, Kelsey, too. "She's slowing down," my sister said, softly but not sadly. "We need to think ahead." Then Ben's voice. "She's becoming a liability. Financially, long-term, you know that, right?" The word cracked through me like a tree limb in a storm. Not shouted, not cruel, just factual. Said the way someone might say, "The roof's leaking." No one objected. No one said, "Don't talk like that." They just let it sit there. Liability. I stood there in the hall, hidden in the dark, heart pounding in my ears. I waited for someone to speak up, to say I'd misunderstood, but the silence stretched long. Then they moved on to other topics: insurance, taxes, the mortgage, as if I were a line item in the budget. That's when I knew. Whatever love used to fill these rooms had been edged out by numbers and projections. I didn't say anything the next morning. I made coffee. I took my vitamins. I thanked Kelsey when she reminded me to drink more water. But something in me went quiet. Not broken, just still. I sat in the sunroom that afternoon, watching light move across the floor, touching the corners of old furniture I once chose myself. My hands rested on the armrests, gently tracing the worn fabric. They still thought I didn't know, that I couldn't tell what they were planning, slowly, politely, step by step. But I saw it now. That was the moment I understood. They weren't worried about me getting worse. They were worried about me staying. The voices inside shifted again, and this time I heard Greg, clear as daylight. His tone was calm, so normal it hurt. That voice used to ground me. Whether we were in traffic, at a funeral, or dealing with bills, Greg always spoke like he had a hand on the wheel. Steady, assured, reliable. It was his steadiness that made me feel like we were a team, even when I was the one bending to keep us balanced. I leaned in closer, the shadows pressing against my back. His voice carried now, full of certainty. "It's already signed," he said plainly. "The spousal consent form was filed with the initial draft. Everything's in motion." My body went cold. The breath I didn't know I was holding slipped out, thin and rattled. "She doesn't even know yet," June replied, laughing under her breath like it was all just some silly oversight. Greg answered without missing a beat. "She trusts me. That's never been an issue." There it was, a truth spoken so casually it burned. He had signed something, on my behalf, without me, a document that required my agreement, and he'd given it, alone, as if my name was just another line to be checked. I stood completely still, as if moving would make it more real. Inside, no one questioned him. No one said, "Wait, did she actually agree?" Not a single voice paused to consider whether I had a say. It wasn't just Greg, it was all of them. Their silence hung in the room like a second ceiling. I had always believed that marriage, at the very least, meant loyalty in the quiet places. That even if I deferred in front of family, even if I let things go at dinner tables and holidays, Greg and I still met as equals behind closed doors. But that belief crumbled the moment I realized he had crossed a line I didn't even know needed guarding. He didn't flinch, didn't hesitate. I was no longer his partner. I was his permission. They talked on. Terms I didn't understand flew between them. Irrevocable, custodial control, tax shelter. At some point, my mother said, "Once it's locked in, she can't undo it anyway." And still, my name was treated like a placeholder, a label, not a person. I wanted to scream, to throw open the door and ask him how long he'd been planning this. But my body stayed pinned in place. The old instincts flared. Maybe he thought he was protecting me. Maybe it's just temporary. Maybe he was forced to sign because of timing. Excuses bloomed, uninvited. They always had, because that's how I was raised, to explain the pain away before it ever had a chance to land. But this pain didn't move. It lodged itself deep, somewhere beneath my ribs. I looked at my hands, still gripping the edge of the brick wall. The lottery ticket was crumpled now, soft from the sweat of my palm. The very thing that should have set me free had become a rope they were quietly tying around my wrists. Greg's voice floated out again. "She'll sign the rest tomorrow. If I bring it to her after dinner, she won't think twice." I swallowed back something bitter. So much was becoming clear now. This wasn't about efficiency. It wasn't about legal timing or financial guidance. It was about control. Every choice I'd ever made with Greg, every joint account, every form, he'd always taken the lead. He'd fill out the papers, and I'd review them like a student before handing them back for submission. I told myself it was just convenience, that he was good with that kind of thing. But now I saw it for what it was. He had been practicing for this moment for years, and I had let him, because I thought love meant ease, and partnership meant trust. No one in that room raised a concern, not about my consent, not about my voice. They were all in quiet agreement that I didn't need to be included, that their plans were somehow more thoughtful than my autonomy. I pressed my back against the cool siding of the house, trying to calm the tightness in my chest. My father hadn't spoken a word since the last exchange, but when I turned slightly to look at him, I saw him watching me, not the house. He didn't ask how I felt. He didn't offer comfort. He simply stood there, letting the silence expand. And in that space, I began to feel something shift inside. Not rage, not yet, but something firmer than pain. A question, solid and sharp. If Greg could sign something that changed my life without asking me, how many other moments had he made decisions without me even knowing? I wasn't missing from just this night. I had been missing for a while, and no one noticed. No one inside was waiting for me to arrive, because, in their eyes, I was already accounted for. And just like that, it was as if I no longer existed as a person. Only a role, a name on a form they had already decided how to manage. Because in their eyes, I was already accounted for. Inside, the mood shifted. Less casual, less family chatter. The words took on a new tone. Cold. Official. I heard timeline, process, and standard filing. The warmth they'd used when talking about how worried they were for me had thinned into sterile, business-like precision, as if someone had flipped a switch from concern to coordination. Tuesday for the financial advisor, Friday for legal review, someone said. Temporary access clears in 48 hours once the hold is in place, another voice added. It wasn't just about what they were doing. It was about how far ahead they already were. This wasn't a discussion, it was a plan. I held my breath as pieces clicked together in my head. The phrasing, the timing, the structure. They weren't robbing me in the dark. They were organizing it in daylight. The kind of theft that came with paperwork, initials, and polite follow-up emails. The kind that didn't require permission if no one thought to ask. Then came the phrase that made my knees nearly give out. She won't even see the full freeze, my sister said. We're running everything through a temporary proxy just to streamline it. Is that in writing? Someone asked. Of course, it's all in the timeline doc. I blinked hard. Timeline document. My husband, my mother, my sister. They had sat down, mapped it out, scheduled my erasure in bullet points and appointments. What they called streamlining was actually locking me out of my own decisions. Control wasn't always about volume or threats. Sometimes it wore a calm face and used words like efficiency and structure. I knew in that moment I was the last to know, and maybe that was the point. Then came another blow. We've added a trusted contact, Greg said smoothly. Someone neutral. Not family? June asked. No, it looks better if it's a friend of the family. Someone from her church. They'll act if anything seems off. I pressed my hand to my chest. Not only had they planned to restrict access, they'd prepped a gatekeeper, someone who could flag my behavior, intervene on my behalf, and stall any attempt I might make to reclaim control. Not me, not even Greg. A stranger wearing the title Trusted, ready to step in if I did anything that wasn't part of the script. A full wall of control built without confrontation. A paper trap lined with good intentions. For a flicker of a second, I considered walking in. I imagined myself calmly stepping into the light, letting them explain everything to me like I was a fragile guest at my own intervention. Signing the damn forms just to make it all stop, just to make my stomach unknot. That's how it always worked before. If I played along, the pressure eased. If I smiled, they relaxed. Surrender dressed up as harmony. But this was different, because this time I wasn't being asked. I was being managed. And that's when my father finally moved. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't offer comfort. He leaned slightly toward me and said, flat and firm, "This isn't protection, this is containment." His words didn't ask for a reaction. They didn't rush me, but they cracked something open. All night I had been absorbing every line, every step of the plan, feeling smaller by the minute. But hearing him say that out loud reminded me, I wasn't crazy. This wasn't care. It was control, and I had a choice. My father didn't say another word. He just looked forward again, letting me sit with it. The wind had picked up slightly. A porch light flickered across the street. I listened again to the voices inside. My mother was laughing softly. My sister asked for a second glass of wine. Greg made a comment about how this will be easier than we thought. They sounded relaxed, triumphant even. And I knew, with a weight that settled deep in my chest, there was no going back from this. Even if I walked away tonight, stayed silent, pretended to understand, this would never be undone. They had drawn a line, and they'd done it with full confidence that I wouldn't notice. But I had, and now I couldn't unsee it. Inside the house, something shifted again, just subtle enough to feel staged. The voices were clearer now, the tone no longer that of a private family conversation, but more like a presentation rehearsal. "She'll respond better if we frame it as a gift," someone said. A pause. "And remind her how much we've done to spare her from the hard parts." I felt my jaw tighten. The words weren't about me. They were about managing me. I was a step in their plan, not a person in their lives. I could hear my mother's voice now, soft, deliberate. "We'll start with the part about how much stress this would have caused her. She always appreciates when people take care of details. Take care, like I was a child. Or a delicate vase they didn't trust to carry its own weight." Then came the next blow. "She should be grateful," my sister said. "We've protected her from so much. She doesn't have to deal with lawyers or deadlines or any of this." My stomach turned. Grateful. That word had followed me my whole life like a leash. Grateful for what I was given, for what others thought best. Grateful for the decisions made in rooms I was never invited into. Grateful for silence that kept me out of trouble and far from confrontation. But what they were really saying was, be grateful you weren't allowed to decide. It was a kindness wrapped in chains. My heart pounded louder than the voices. They were still calm, still perfectly poised. And I realized they weren't just doing this. They were preparing to perform it. Rehearsing how they'd tell me, how they'd shape my reaction, how they'd spin control into kindness. Then came the quiet threat. "If she resists," Greg said carefully, "we don't push. We just remind her how conflict would affect everyone. Mom's health, Dad's nerves, the grandkids. She'd never want that kind of tension." A low hum of agreement followed. No one raised their voice. No one needed to. They'd built a whole ecosystem around the idea that my peace of mind was too dangerous to trust me with. And now, any resistance would be framed as selfish, ungrateful, disruptive. "Let's not let this spiral into something permanent," June added. "We can't afford family fractures." Translation: agree or take the blame for tearing things apart. I gripped the porch rail and felt the wood bite into my palm. And then they turned on him, my father. "I love Dad, but he's too close to this," my brother-in-law said. "He still thinks things work the way they did 40 years ago." June laughed, low and dismissive. He's emotional. He's always been soft on her. It's sweet, but not realistic. He doesn't understand how these systems operate anymore. My breath caught. It wasn't just what they said, it was how easily they said it. The man who had raised us, who had built his entire life around making sure we were safe and seen. They talked about him like a senile bystander, like he was the weakest link in their chain. And he heard it. He didn't flinch. He didn't speak. But I saw it. His hands, clasped in his lap, tightened. His jaw shifted just enough to break the mask. They had dismissed him too. And in doing so, they had made the worst mistake of all, because they reminded me who he still was, and who I still was, when I stopped letting them define me. My silence cracked. All these years, I'd used it as a tool, to smooth conflict, to keep the peace, to survive. But now it was doing the opposite. It wasn't protecting anyone. It was allowing this to happen. If I stayed quiet now, I wasn't just agreeing, I was helping them. I couldn't live with that. But I didn't move. Not yet. I stayed in the dark, listening, cataloging. Every phrase, every plan, every cruel kindness disguised as concern. I knew if I walked in now, they'd wrap me in their words, spin me in circles, flood me with reassurances. I wouldn't win the moment. They were too prepared. So I chose something else. I chose to stay still. I chose to remember. They thought I was passive, that I'd fold like I always had, that my silence meant surrender. But it didn't. It meant they'd never see me coming. And oddly enough, that thought calmed me. Not in a smug, victorious way, but in the kind of quiet steadiness that comes when fear finally gives up its grip. My breath slowed. My shoulders dropped. I could hear my heartbeat without it rattling my chest. I hadn't felt this clear all night. The chaos was still happening. Voices inside, decisions being finalized, timelines whispered like they were ticking bombs. But none of that held me anymore. Not the dread, not the guilt, not even the grief. I slid my hand into my coat pocket, found my phone, and opened the voice memos app. No dramatics, no hiding behind bushes or planting microphones like in the movies. I simply hit record, set the phone down on the porch's wooden ledge, and angled the mic toward the half-open window where their voices drifted out like smoke. I'd waited for this moment, not just tonight, but in a sense, for years. I'd learned to gather the full picture before speaking up, because if I didn't, they'd twist it into misunderstanding or overreaction. This time, I'd have the entire canvas, their own words, their own plans, without edits. Inside, they were still talking. "She'll come around," my brother-in-law said. "She always does." Laughter, not cruel, but casual, comfortable. "She just needs time," my sister replied. "It's a lot for her, but when she sees we've already streamlined everything, she'll realize we're saving her from the mess." "Bank's on board, right?" someone asked. "And the temporary authorities locked for 30 days?" "Yep, all standard procedure. Just need her signature to finalize, and even then, if she stalls, we can push through under stress exception." I clenched my teeth. Push through. "She'll sign," June said. "Even if she hesitates, give her a few days and a little space to breathe. Don't crowd her, just nudge." Another voice, softer but sharper. "And if she doesn't?" That's when I heard it, the arrogance slipping through. "She'll calm down, eventually." It wasn't said with malice, just assumption. Like I was a toddler mid-tantrum who'd tire herself out and nap it off. I stayed silent, because they weren't finished yet. "She doesn't even know about the trusted contact thing yet, right?" one of them asked. "No, and we don't need to bring it up unless it becomes relevant. It's just a safeguard. We're not doing anything shady here." "Right." I pressed my fingers to the wood rail again and felt the splinters catch on my skin. Good. I needed something to anchor me, because in that moment I felt something shift permanently inside me. They weren't afraid of doing this, they were afraid of me realizing I could stop it. I mentally cataloged everything I had so far. The names, the steps, the sequence of manipulation dressed as support, the legal jargon mixed with familial guilt. This wasn't hearsay anymore. It was evidence. No raised voices, no threats. Just the quiet machinery of a takeover masked as concern. And now I had their blueprint. I knew what exposing this would cost me. I wasn't naive. There would be fallout. Words said that couldn't be unsaid. Relationships frayed beyond repair. People I'd loved my whole life would look at me like a traitor. But that price wasn't higher than my voice, and for once, I was choosing me. I closed my eyes for a second, just to breathe. Then I slid the phone back into my coat, pressed stop on the recording, and stepped away from the porch railing. I turned the knob slowly, no rush, no pounding footsteps or slammed doors. Just a decision carried out in full awareness. The hallway light spilled across the threshold as the door creaked open. I didn't walk in to beg. And after that moment, there was quiet, not silence like before, the tense, tiptoeing hush of people plotting behind walls. This was a deeper quiet, the kind that settles over you when something breaks and you finally stop pretending it didn't. It filled the house slowly, room by room, like fog rolling in after a storm. I didn't celebrate. There was nothing about any of this that felt like winning. But I had space again. Space to breathe, to think, to feel the things I hadn't let myself feel while I was still in defense mode. The day after the wellness visit, the phone barely rang. No text, no check-ins. Kelsey didn't stop by. Ben didn't swing through on his lunch break. It wasn't a coincidence. It was retreat. They weren't sure how to handle a version of me that didn't fold, and I wasn't sure how to handle a version of them who'd pushed this far. The following week passed like a slow thaw. I spent time doing ordinary things: laundry, walking to the pharmacy, trimming the hydrangeas. It felt strange to do those things without the weight of being watched, evaluated, second-guessed. One afternoon, I opened the cedar chest in the guest room, not looking for anything in particular, just needing to remind myself what I'd kept, what still belonged to me. Under the neatly folded quilt my mother made in '63, I found it. The small wooden box I hadn't touched in years. Inside, still wrapped in the same tissue paper, was my old music box, the one from my father. A simple thing, rosewood, chipped at the corner, with a winding key that always stuck halfway through. It played no song I could name, just a soft, looping melody that never quite resolved. I used to listen to it when I felt invisible in this house, long before the battles, before the accusations, before my children mistook control for care. Back then, I thought that music meant safety. Now, it sounded like survival. Funny how things shift when you're not trying to make them fit a prettier version of the story. There were no grand consequences after I took back control, just boundaries, hard lines in soft voices. The attorney called to confirm the updates had been officially recorded. The bank flagged my file with limited access notes. My physician's office added a private PIN for appointment discussions. I didn't report my kids. I didn't go on some crusade. I didn't destroy them. I just stopped letting them destroy me. When neighbors asked why Kelsey wasn't coming around much anymore, I said we were taking some space. When Ben's wife waved politely at the grocery store, I waved back. I had no need to explain what they did. That wasn't justice. Justice was the simple fact that they didn't have keys to this house anymore, or passwords, or the assumption that I'd sit quietly while they rewrote the terms of my life. One Sunday, a week later, I took a walk to the park. Not far, just a few blocks. the same stretch I'd walked 100 times before. But this time, I stopped at the little bench near the library, sat for a long while, watched a young mom chase her toddler through the fallen leaves, listened to the breeze shake the last few golden hangers off a maple tree. Then I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a folded slip of paper. It was a recipe, cornbread stuffing, written in my mother's hand. I found it the night before, tucked inside an old cookbook. The same one we'd used every Thanksgiving until Kelsey modernized the meal with store-bought sides and gluten-free versions of everything. I stared at that recipe for a long time, my thumb brushing over the edge of the paper. It hit me then, not the loss of the house or the finances or the family dinners. It was the loss of the idea of family I used to believe in. That family meant protection, loyalty, safety. But I knew now, family isn't what you're born into. It's who stands beside you when there's nothing left to gain. I thought of Jeanette, how she'd shown up at the notary office with no questions, just presence. I thought of Margaret from book club, who dropped off soup without prying. I even thought of Mr. Lanes, my neighbor, who started shoveling my driveway this winter without ever mentioning it. They never asked to be called family, but they acted like it when it counted. So that's who I started letting in. Not the people who shared my blood, but the ones who shared my truth. And yes, it still hurt. I'd be lying if I said otherwise. There were mornings I woke up thinking I heard Kelsey's car in the driveway. Evenings when I picked up the phone to text Ben a question about the lawnmower, only to remember we hadn't spoken in over a month. But I let the grief come, and I let it go too. No shame, no guilt. Because grieving doesn't mean you did something wrong. Sometimes it just means you finally saw things clearly. One morning, I found a note taped to the inside of my cabinet door, written in my own handwriting, probably years ago, on a Post-it now faded to pale yellow. Usefulness is not the same as worth. It stopped me cold. I must have scribbled it down in the middle of some ordinary day, trying to remind myself of something I hadn't fully understood back then. Now, I did. I had spent so much of my life being helpful, agreeable, available, useful. And they loved me for that. Or maybe they just needed me. But love that disappears when you stop being convenient isn't love. It's dependency disguised as devotion. And I didn't want it anymore. So I locked my doors at night, not out of fear, but out of choice. I drank my coffee in peace, not in loneliness, but in freedom. And when the house creaked at 3 a.m., as old houses do, I didn't hear ghosts. I heard my own breathing, steady, present, mine. I didn't get my family back, but I got my life.